Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're bridging what might seem like completely separate worlds. We're talking the brutal, unforgiving mechanics of modern video games, the real-world history of ancient Gothic architecture, and the profound depths of existential philosophy. Right? Sounds crazy, but stick with me. We're going to look at how a single, notoriously frustrating video game enemy, the gargoyle from the game Dark Souls, actually serves as this magnificent lens for understanding how we handle struggle, how we find meaning, and really what our own inner nature is all about.
Now, I want you to really think about something for a second. When you're confronted with severe, seemingly unfair frustration, that massive, unscalable wall standing right between you and your goal, how do you actually react? Do you put your head down and find purpose in the grind? Or do you immediately start looking for a shortcut, a loophole, maybe a way to just cheat the system? Keep your honest answer in mind, because this exact dichotomy is literally at the heart of everything we're exploring today.
Okay, Section 1. The Gargoyle's True Purpose, Wardens of Stone. To truly grasp what this game is doing, we actually need to rewind and look at the real-world history of our primary antagonist. What were these stone monsters actually designed to do centuries ago? Well, the origin of the word itself is super fascinating. Gargoyle comes from the old French word gargoyle, which literally means throat or gullet, and it actually shares a linguistic root with the word gargle, kind of imitating that gurgling sound of water. Because functionally, a gargoyle wasn't just a scary statue. No, it was a highly engineered medieval gutter. Its gaping mouth was quite literally a spout, designed to vomit rainwater away from the side of a building. This prevented the masonry from eroding and ultimately saved the entire structure's foundation.
Now, this architectural concept didn't just magically appear out of nowhere in the Middle Ages. The idea of an animal-shaped waterspout actually stretches all the way back to ancient Egypt and Greece. To put that into perspective, the Temple of Zeus originally featured over 100 heavy marble lion spouts. But the iconic monstrous gargoyles we usually picture today, those made their earliest known medieval appearance on France's Laon Cathedral, right around the year 1200.
And this brings up a brilliant point about a very common historical misconception. If a stone monster on a church doesn't actually spout water, technically speaking, it's not a gargoyle. It's actually called a grotesque, or a chimera. Like those famous monsters perched up on Notre Dame in Paris? Yeah, most of those are actually grotesques that were added way later in the 19th century. So just remember, true gargoyles have a mechanical, protective purpose, whereas grotesques are purely ornamental. They were usually just meant to ward off evil spirits or, playfully mock the sinners down below.
But hey, not everyone loved these bizarre additions to their churches. Take St. Bernard of Clairvaux, a 12th century Cistercian monk. He was absolutely repulsed by them. He straight up asked, what are these fantastic monsters doing in the cloisters before the eyes of the brothers as they read? He just found these monstrous mashups absurd, distracting, and honestly, deeply insulting to the austere nature of the church. He just couldn't wrap his head around why you'd combine humans and beasts into these ridiculous twisted forms just to spit out water.
Moving right along to Section 2. The Dark Souls Crucible. Pleasure spiked with pain.
So, that historical function we just talked about, spitting out a torrential flow of water to protect a foundation, that is exactly how the video game Dark Souls utilizes its own gargoyle bosses. Let's transition over into the digital realm here. The game acts as this metaphorical spout, aggressively testing the foundation of the player's resolve. Game director Hidetaka Miyazaki deliberately baked extreme suffering right into the design of Dark Souls. I mean, it's brutal. You have heavily limited healing. Checkpoints are incredibly rare, and no, you cannot just quick save your progress. Even if you've got great armor, a single hit from an enemy can instantly drain anywhere from 20 to 100% of your health. It operates as a literal crucible. Failure is absolutely guaranteed, and your patience is quite literally your only true weapon.
But here's the thing, the suffering isn't just mechanical, it's existential. So the really crucial point here is what academics call the game's amoral void. Dark Souls actively forces you to commit acts of violence without giving you any moral validation whatsoever. A totally heartbreaking example of this is the boss fight against Sif. Sif is this giant, majestic wolf who is simply guarding her fallen master's tomb. She's not evil, but the game demands that you kill her to progress, and it offers zero narrative reward. No heroic music swells, and no characters come out to comfort you afterward.
And what makes this encounter truly devastating is what happens when you reduce Sif to exactly 20% health. Her animations actually change. She begins to visibly limp. desperately and pathetically swinging her sword at you in obvious pain. Yet, the game still demands the kill. It essentially forces the player to step back from their own empathy, initiating this descent into emotional callousness just so they can survive the digital world.
Which leads us to Section 3, Meaning in the Suffering, the myth of the gamer.
Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would anyone subject themselves to this intense frustration and guilt? Well, there's a fascinating academic thesis that argues this brutal repetition actually elevates the game into a profound philosophical experience. In fact, it maps perfectly to what Albert Camus defined as absurdism. Camus defined absurdism as the human drive to seek meaning in a universe that is fundamentally silent and meaningless. In Dark Souls, your character is cursed with the dark sign. This means every single time you die, you just resurrect at a bonfire to try again. You are quite literally a modern-day Sisyphus, cursed to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only to watch it roll right back down, over and over and over again.
As you die and repeat this cycle, you eventually reach the end of the game, and you're presented with a massive choice. You can either link the fire, which the in-game gods claim will save the world, but as it turns out, is actually a total lie that just perpetuates a false, endless cycle of suffering. Or you can choose the Age of Dark. This means breaking the cycle entirely to embrace the harsh, unvarnished reality of mankind, and, if you pay attention, the game's dense, hidden lore subtly encourages the astute player to reject that false light of the gods and embrace the dark.
And this perfectly echoes Camus' most famous conclusion: one must imagine Sisyphus happy. You see, meaning isn't just handed to you by the game, just like it isn't handed to you by the universe. Meaning is forged in your active, deeply personal choice to simply keep playing, to grip that controller, accept the brutal rules of this dark world, and defiantly struggle against absolutely insurmountable odds. The persistence itself, that is your rebellion.
Okay, on to Section 4, the urge to cheese, breaking the matrix. Let's pivot sharply away from the dense academic philosophy for a second here. Because realistically, how does a modern, casual player actually handle an impossible obstacle like the gargoyle boss? Spoiler alert, they don't want to be Sisyphus. A huge portion of players outright refuse to endure the intended suffering. They seek the path of least resistance. So instead of finding profound existential meaning in a boss fight, what do? They hop right onto YouTube to find a glitch, a way to cheese the boss. They reject the world's rules entirely because to them, it's just pure entertainment. It's not some philosophical crucible.
And nothing illustrates that mentality better than this. This is a real sequence of steps from a YouTube tutorial showing you exactly how to glitch the gargoyle. Get this. First, you keep a random enemy alive. Then you perform a highly specific block, a parry, to literally glitch your character straight through the fog wall. You run back, rest at a checkpoint, and when you finally return to the boss, the terrifying ancient gargoyle is completely frozen in place because of a programming error. The YouTuber excitedly explains that you can now just stand there and punch this paralyzed monster to death with your bare hands. It is completely, utterly absurd.
Section 5, becoming the Übermensch, transcending the game.
So, we have these two wildly different reactions to the Crucible, right? The noble philosopher accepting the struggle, and the casual gamer punching a glitched statue. Bringing all these historical, philosophical, and gaming themes together, the academic thesis argues that the ultimate goal of the Dark Souls player isn't really just to beat the game. It's to become what Friedrich Nietzsche called the Übermensch, or the Overman. The Übermensch is basically someone who overcomes their own innate weaknesses, rejects society's false virtues like pity or otherworldly hope, and creates their very own foundational values.
And the absolute crucial point here is how this ties into Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of one's fate. The player who truly masters Dark Souls doesn't just tolerate the suffering. No, they actually learn to love the necessity of it. They accept the brutal mechanics, the total lack of a quick save, those devastating boss hits, and they become a yes-sayer. They find genuine joy and self-actualization through the ultimate mastery of their own frustration.
Which brings us to this incredibly defining statement. The true Sisyphus doesn't glitch the boulder. While cheesing the game and punching a frozen gargoyle is, admittedly, a pretty hilarious act of digital rebellion, it totally robs you of the actual transformation. True existential clarity, that real sense of accomplishment that builds up your internal foundation, that only comes from facing the designed pain head-on. If you glitch the boulder all the way to the top of the hill, you haven't really climbed the mountain, have you? You've just avoided the lesson. Which leads us right back to you. When the gargoyles of your own life start spitting a torrential downpour of frustration your way, how are you going to respond? Will you blindly perpetuate the cycles handed to you? Will you desperately look for a glitch to cheat the system? Or will you embrace the struggle, master the crucible, and forge your own meaning? Take that thought with you today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.